Well, hello everybody, and welcome to another edition of NASCAR Mount Rushmore. As this week we go through the Mount Rushmore for Bristol Motor Speedway, the world's fastest half mile, the last great Coliseum, one of my favorite tracks in NASCAR and NASCAR history. Obviously, with this generation of car that we're in right now, the racing hasn't been quite as good, but it's provided so many great memories over the year and great moments, especially me being a Kyle Busch fan, him getting the sweep there, two sweeps there actually. That was freaking awesome to see, and all his success there. One of my best NASCAR memories when I was a kid, I think it was the 2002 Sharpie 500. I was 6 at the time, and then Jeff Gordon did the bump and run on Rusty Wallace. And then, of course, you have some of the big moments from the 90s that I was either way too young for or not even born yet, including both of the Dale Earnhardt spinning Terry Labonte moments, one for him to win, and one Terry Labonte took a destroyed race car to victory lane. I always just see that like destroyed nose just pulling into victory lane, oh so slow with smoke pouring out of it. Looks like it's straight out of a freaking movie. I love Bristol. It's Bristol, baby. Junior used to call it the hottest ticket in NASCAR. He changed that a couple of years ago once we saw what Hotlanta, the new version of Hotlanta or Echo Park Speedway, whatever you want to call it, is providing. But Bristol Motor Speedway has provided some great history over its many years. It's also had multiple different surfaces over the many years. It used to look completely different. It used to not even be a Coliseum years ago. It looks completely different now than when it did in the past, but no matter what, it's always provided some great moments, some great memories, and some of the best drivers in our sport have had success there. So let's go through the Mount Rushmore for Bristol Motor Speedway. Starting with our first driver, shouldn't come as too big of a surprise. I think this driver's success at Bristol Motor Speedway has been well noted pretty much any time we go to Bristol, and especially this weekend because it's the spring weekend and it's Fox, and this former driver, former commentator, used to work very closely with Fox and was actually part of the broadcast a couple weeks ago in Darlington. And of course, I'm talking about Jaws, DW, Darrell Waltrip, and I would also consider Darrell Waltrip to be the GOAT of Bristol Motor Speedway. Darrell Waltrip with 12 victories at Bristol, 26 top fives, 32 top tens, and 3,436 laps led. Those are some crazy. That the win stat is insane. 12 wins at Bristol. Bristol is such a tough track, not just on your car, but to really keep your car clean. It's really impressive that DW was able to do that. He had so much success over his number of years at Bristol Motor Speedway. I wish I was alive for a lot of his success at Bristol Motor Speedway because he seemed like he made that place his home in Bristol, Tennessee, and Bristol is also near the top of my bucket list out of tracks I personally want to go to. And congrats to DW. DW don't care about me per se, but DW, if you see this, you're the GOAT of Bristol Motor Speedway. And that lets us move on to, in my opinion, the GOAT of NASCAR, the greatest NASCAR driver of all time, in my opinion. I just mentioned him a moment ago because he's had some very exciting moments, I guess you could say, at Bristol Motor Speedway. And both of the big moments, I would say, made him the Intimidator. Didn't make him the Intimidator, but were part of that moniker of the Intimidator, part of the Black Knight. And of course, I'm talking about the driver of the number 3, Dale Earnhardt. Along with that one victory where he turned Terry Labonte, where he rattled his cage, he has 8 other wins, making 9 wins at Bristol Motor Speedway for Dale Earnhardt Sr. with 20 top 5s, 30 top 10s, and 3,751 laps led. I feel like Bristol was one of those tracks where it was just perfect for Dale Earnhardt. I'm pretty sure he got his first win also at Bristol Motor Speedway back in the day as well. Bristol just seems like the perfect track for Dale Earnhardt because it's all about aggression. It's all about just seeing how much you're willing to push your vehicle through these corners and how you're able to get around traffic and all that. It's one of those racetracks. So it just seems like it was built for a driver like Dale Earnhardt to have success at. And he had so much success at that racetrack, and who knows, he could have potentially got even more wins at that racetrack. I was actually debating on making him the GOAT of Bristol Motor Speedway. There was a debate in my head for that because he ran less races than DW. Obviously, his life got cut short, so maybe he could have gotten more. But nonetheless, he's one of the greatest ever at Bristol Motor Speedway, and he's made my Mount Rushmore, as he's made a lot of my Mount Rushmores, because I consider him the greatest driver in NASCAR history. So he's obviously going to end up on some of my Mount Rushmores for these NASCAR tracks, which leads me to another driver that I've actually named more times in these NASCAR Mount Rushmores than I honestly thought I would going through his history. And I've said it a couple times, I consider this driver to be the king of the short tracks in the 90s, and that had to be Rusty Wallace. Rusty, just always amazing at the short tracks, has 9 victories at Bristol Motor Speedway, 22 top 5s, 29 top 10s, and 3,723 laps led at the world's fastest half mile. At this point, I expect Rusty to really be on every single Mount Rushmore out of short tracks that I have. And I've gone through Bristol, I've gone through Martinsville. I think that's it, actually. I think I've only gotten through the 2 short tracks. But Richmond, I can definitely see him getting on there. He's just in North Wilkesboro. We got Wilkesboro coming up too. So he's so great at short tracks. And that's what I knew him as when I was a kid, because I wasn't quite the I wouldn't consider myself a NASCAR historian to like the 3rd degree or anything, but I know somewhat I know a good amount, obviously, about NASCAR history. But when I was a kid, I just really saw Rusty Wallace as that short track guy, because I didn't really see him do too much at other racetracks. I would see him have a lot of success at Martinsville and Bristol and Richmond, and he would do pretty well on the road courses. But since I've really went through this, I've kind of learned how good, and obviously I learned later on that he ended up winning a championship, but going through this, I've really learned how good Rusty Wallace truly was, and I'd say he's probably a very underrated driver in NASCAR history. I don't think people give him enough credit. I don't think people talk about him as much as they probably should. So congrats to Rusty Wallace on making my NASCAR Mount Rushmore for Bristol Motor Speedway. And now we are down to the 4th driver on the NASCAR Mount Rushmore. And I do feel like if this video gets a lot of views, that this might be controversial to some people. But if you really consider the eras that they raced in, the driver that I put in my Mount Rushmore is a lot more difficult to get to garner the stats and garner the accomplishments that he had at Bristol Motor Speedway over this other driver. And that is Kyle Busch. I put Rowdy as my 4th driver on the Mount Rushmore. Rowdy's stats at Bristol Motor Speedway: he has 8 victories, 14 top 5s, 19 top 10s, and 2,568 laps led at Bristol Motor Speedway. And I could see it in the comments now. Why didn't you put Cale Yarborough in there? Why didn't you put Cale Yarborough in there? And I've said this with some of my NASCAR Mount Rushmores before, that I do consider the era that they raced in, that's kind of a handicap almost for me. I'm just going to be honest. That's why I consider Dale Earnhardt the GOAT over Richard Petty, because I consider Dale Earnhardt's era way more competitive than Richard Petty's era of racing. They're both on the Mount Rushmore. They're both great race car drivers, but one era is way more competitive than the other era. It's just a fact. It's just a fact. And there's arguments about this in all sports. So I had to put Kyle Busch on there because the era that he competed in, for him to get 8 wins in the NASCAR Cup Series is insane. And the Busch brothers overall just had a lot of success. Kurt Busch, his older brother, got 6 wins at Bristol Motor Speedway, which is one of the most all-time as well. But a lot of people are going to be like, why didn't you put Cale on here? Cale, if you look at Cale's stats are better, and he's also run less races than Kyle Busch. Cale has 9 wins. Kyle Busch has 8. Cale Yarborough is the all-time lap leader at Bristol Motor Speedway. But like I said, you have to consider the era that he was racing. And he was racing, obviously he was racing before DW. I think there was a little bit of overlap with DW. When DW came in, he just completely took over. Earnhardt obviously competed with him later on. I mean, those early years, DW, it was all Darrell Waltrip. He ran that place. That was his place. And never at any point it really seemed like Cale Yarborough just completely owned Bristol per se. He was very good at Bristol in a less competitive era, and I had to put Kyle Busch in there, and that's my argument for that. If anybody wants to come at me in the comments. And Kyle Busch was just completely dominant here. He had so many great achievements here. Him getting the sweeps at Bristol Motor Speedway is insane. It is insane how great he was at Bristol Motor Speedway in all series. He was just phenomenal at this racetrack. He's still probably phenomenal at the racetrack. We'll see how he does in the Truck Series race this week. If you're watching during Bristol week, we'll have to see how he does this week. I don't think he's going to compete in the RCR car, that's for sure. But yeah, that's my fourth driver on the Mount Rushmore for Bristol Motor Speedway. So just to go through my four drivers on the Mount Rushmore one more time, I have Darrell Waltrip on the Mount Rushmore, and I also consider him the GOAT of Bristol Motor Speedway. We have Dale Earnhardt on the Mount Rushmore. We got Rusty Wallace, and then the last driver we have put on the Mount Rushmore for Bristol Motor Speedway is Rowdy Busch. But let me know in the comments, who would you put on your Mount Rushmore for Bristol Motor Speedway? But for now, I'm Trackside Larry saying peace.